This Week in History.
Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
Discovery, go at throttle up.
All right, Johnny, so I got another Revolutionary War thing for us as the first thing this week in history. It's the Siege of Yorktown, Johnny. It's going to begin on September 28th, 1781, and will end on October 19th, 1781. So a couple-week-long siege.
A siege of Yorktown, Indiana?
Well, Yorktown, Virginia, a little bit of a different Yorktown. I don't think Indiana is a thing just as of yet in 1781.
Well, you can understand my confusion then.
Yeah, well, it's a thing. It's just a thing where there aren't white people.
Right, there is that.
So our history books do a really kind of crappy job of telling us what really is going on and how the war really ends, the Revolutionary War. It also does a really crappy job of telling us how crucial the French were. Like, when I grew up, I always thought, the French supplied a couple of boats, and that was kind of about it. But really, the Americans, we won the day. But in reality, not so much.
I mean, the only thing I heard about the French growing up was that they surrendered to everything. Like, the French flag was the white flag, and they were a bunch of cowards. But the more we do this podcast, the more I realized America wouldn't quite be America without the French.
They definitely wouldn't be. So the Siege of Yorktown begins when the Americans, led by General George Washington, and also Baron von Steuben, who is a Prussian, or what is nowadays Germany, but a Prussian officer who came actually to train our soldiers because, we weren't really a professional army, and we didn't really know how to shoot them guns good, so.
Yeah, because we had a bunch of ragtag people who decided they didn't want, or they wanted their freedom of religion or whatever the case was, and they fled a country. We didn't populate this country with warriors.
Not the most militant society. Well, I mean, we were. Well, anyways, yeah. So Baron von Steuben comes over. He trains our troops, but he's still stuck around. They would be leading 9,000 men, which was 6,000 regular troops with 3,000 militia. They would be aided by the French, who were led by the Marquis de Lafayette and the Comte de Gras. They both had around 8,800 men in their command and 29 warships. So pretty much at Yorktown, half of our forces were French.
All right. How about that?
So a lot more
than
I ever was taught in history class, and purely number-wise, probably wouldn't have been able to do this without them. So the French and the American armies, they would unite south of New York, and they would operate a series of deceptive moves to make the British think that they were going to attack New York, but in reality, they marched their army south to surround Lord Cornwallis. In early September, de Gras would beat the British fleet, trapping Lord Cornwallis in Yorktown, so he had no way to retreat back to England, so he's now officially surrounded. On September 28th, the French and the American forces would arrive outside of Yorktown from Williamsburg and surround Lord Cornwallis and his 7,000 redcoats and a little under 3,000 German allies because, like the 7-Year War, this is almost a world war in and of itself, our American Revolution. We do have Germans that are fighting. We have French that are fighting. We've got British, Americans. There are Canadians that are fighting. It is almost.
And does that boil down to all these countries wanted to be a part of it because of trade routes and resources, and there's value here, and so they're like, we need to, help either one side or the other out, or what? Well, why were so many people involved?
So for the French, it was definitely a very much, we want to stick it back to the English. So the Americans that are now fighting against the British will join up with them to stick it to the English for us losing the 7 Years' War. And for the Germans,
my enemy is my enemy type of deal.
Yeah, exactly. And the Germans, well, at this point, Germany isn't a nation; it's a bunch of little mini states. And Hesse was a mercenary force, so a lot of mercenary soldiers came out of the province of Hesse. So that's where a lot of the Germans came from for the British. It wasn't so much.
So just money.
It's money. It wasn't so much we give a shit. We just want to be paid.
Yeah. Oh, you're paying better? Okay. Yeah, we'll do that. Whatever. That's fine.
Over the next few weeks, Yorktown would be sieged from land and by sea, with the good guys losing 88 men with 301 wounded, while the bad guys, they would lose around 309 killed, 595 wounded, and 7,685 would ultimately surrender. Final surrender would come on October 14th, 1781, effectively ending the American Revolutionary War. There were still some battles and skirmishes here or there, but this is pretty much the end of all major hostilities.
So that's the nail on the coffin there.
That's the nail in the coffin, and that's what got us to to today. Maybe not might have been the best solution, I guess. I mean, yay, America!
America.
Everybody loves America. And the last thing I got for us this week, Johnny, is that Henry Ford would introduce the Ford Model T on October 1st, 1908. So this is pretty much the first mass-produced vehicle, and it makes cars a viable thing for the average family to have.
Right. This is kind of what people think of as the start of the car, the automobile. If you look at like when it was invented or when it came about, this is a date you get, and then there's kind of those articles that was like, well, technically, in the late 1800s they had it, but it wasn't accessible.
Yeah, cars were being made and sold as far back as 1880, but they weren't accessible to the general population. We actually did a This Week in History on the very first car, which is really, it's kind of cool to see it actually in operation. But this is the first mass-produced car that you can actually go out and buy affordably without a 5-year wait period for it to be built by hand. Its official designation is the Model T touring car and was introduced at a $950 price tag, or almost $25,000 in today's money, which is about what cars cost today, really. I mean, not...
It's like a Honda. It's like a mid-range Honda Civic.
Mid-range Honda Civic, yep. For that $950, you would get, at the very first model, a convertible four-seater with a four-cylinder engine with a whopping 22 horsepower, which is actually a lot more horsepower than I thought would be there, because like my 96 Ford Escort had only 60 horsepower, so, I mean, really...
Yeah, well, there's a lot to be said about the efficiency of the combustion engine between the early 1900s and the 1990s and 2000s.
Yeah, the Model T was putting out like 4 miles to the gallon, and that Escort of mine was putting out above 30 miles to the gallon. So, I mean, it did get a little bit more efficient. Horsepower-wise,
they figured some things out.
Although that horsepower was very much hampered by the 2-speed transmission. And by 2-speed transmission, there wasn't really as much of a clutch in driving a Model T. It's kind of taking a lever and pulling it forward for first gear, and then all the way back for second gear. Yeah.
And you just make it change.
You just make it change. Yep. But it's kind of like the engine is run. Driving a Model T is crazy. Go look up a YouTube video on how to drive one. It is not at all what driving a modern car is.
No, well, and a lot of the early cars too, because the kind of the layout of a car was not figured out at that point. And so like they had all sorts of different like locations for the steering wheels. They had levers that you would steer with. They tried all sorts of different things in the early models of cars that, seem absurd now and insane, but they didn't have a template to work from.
It was based on like the horse-drawn carriages kind of thing without a horse is how it was set up. Yep. Also, in the original, advertisement for the Model T, it also advertised that you got a windshield, a speedometer, gas lamps for the gas gauge is what they call them, gas lamps, generator, a horn, oil lamps for your headlights because we're not running electric headlights yet. You're still you got 2 of these guys in the front of your car. Good luck.
Just drop it in and hope they don't blow out.
Exactly. And you would get a set of tools. So that's nice of them, give you a set of tools. Although that doesn't inspire a whole lot of confidence that you're not going to break down when they package in
anytime
tools.
They sell you, okay, well, here's your brand new car. Oh, also, you're going to need these, this toolbox because you're going to need it. Because it's not going to make it that far.
It's not a matter of if it's going to break down. It's a matter of when. Maybe you'll get to the grocery store before it breaks down, but maybe you won't. It's an adventure.
Hard to say.
The Model T provided, like I said, mass-produced transport for everybody. In its lifetime, it would sell 16.5 million cars, which is still to this day the 8th most sold car line in history.
That's insane.
Which is crazy to think. Granted, there were more models that came out than just the convertible 4-seater. There was like trucks, there was 4-door models, 2-door models, hard tops, soft tops, all a bunch of different models. But they're all on that Model T line. So think of your Chevy Cruze that has the LS model, the hatchbacks, and all that other different. It's that.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume it was basically the same underneath chassis and everything.
Yeah, it's
and
the
then
same
they put
engine,
on a
same
different top.
chassis, just different shell put on top of it.
Yeah, they just put a different building on top of it.
Within a matter of days of being introduced, it would sell 15,000 cars. So orders came in, 15,000 cars, right within a couple of days of it being introduced, and those cars were produced and given to them in a quick, fashionable manner, which was never. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's probably more cars than had ever been sold up to that point to begin with, including all the other models that were out before this.
Yeah.
On May 26, 1927, Ford would see the 15th million Model T roll off the assembly line. Like, I can't imagine them producing a car for almost 20 years to begin with. Nowadays, like just a car model for 20 years, but shit.
Yeah.
They did.
That's, I mean, not a lot of innovation going on.
No, and
at the
it would be
Ford
replaced
factory
with
this
the
time.
Model A, which I think would come out 1928-ish, I think is when the first Model A's started rolling off the assembly line, which were a little bit better. Still not very efficient with the engine, though.
Incrementally.
Incrementally, yep. By the end of production, the Model T would actually be offered in more colors than just black. So the old adage, you could have your Model T in any color you want as long as it's black. They actually did, from the factory, start producing it in more than just black. Although black was definitely the most popular.
I didn't think color was invented until like the 50s or something, right? Like what?
Color TV.
The whole world was black and white. What other color? Are you going to get a gray one?
Yeah, I mean, you could get a gray one, yeah.
Light gray?
And to finish this all off, this is really nothing to do with this week in history, but it is a Henry Ford fact, and I have to leave it off because we have to talk about this individual every single week. Henry Ford would distribute Mein Kampf to his employees prior to World War II, so Henry Ford was a Hitler lover.
I mean, how upset do you think Henry Ford was when Hitler decided to go with the Mercedes-Benz as his car of choice?
Or the
You think he was
Volkswagen?
offended?
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Well,
I don't think
there's
he was
pictures
cheap.
of him driving around in an early Mercedes-Benz,
there
waving
is.
to his
doing
followers.
doing his little hi everybody salute. Yeah. I think Henry Ford, any anger or hostility he might have had was quickly dissipated by the fact that the U.S. military used the Ford engine in like everything. They had the Jeep that they had them produce. I think they were using Ford engines in a lot of like the big tanks and trucks and all that. So I don't think he was really too terribly sad about losing out on the Nazis.
You think he probably did all right for himself?
I think he did all right for
financially.
himself. Yeah.
And that's This Week in History.